Hello and welcome to the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. This is your regular update for all your tillage news and advice. Spring is moving on despite the cool weather. Spring crops in particular are looking well at the moment. However, the wet spell is hindering crop agronomy actions and there are many jobs which are now edging towards urgent. Success for any grower is to complete these jobs and keep the crop growing strongly. All growers are aware disease control is needed in spring barley. However, selecting the correct product and timing will determine if the farmer gets value for money. I'm delighted today to be joined by Eoin Lyons, the Teagasc Boortmalt Programme Advisor, and Deirdre Doyle, a researcher in Teagasc Oak Park. Eoin, can I first come to you? How are crops looking at the moment, and are there any agronomic problems evident out in the field?
For the most part, crops aren't looking too bad. They've improved substantially in the past 10 to 14 days. Many were struggling there for a period when we had that low temperature and rainfall. And it was leading to large amount of stress and micronutrient deficiencies were fairly common in crops. But since the arrival of that rain, the growth has really picked up. And although temperatures, they're still a little below average for the time of year, tillers have formed well, and there's no major disease to report coming through on them tillers. And look, the long-range weather looks like that there might be a pickup in the weather, in the temperatures going forward. So hopefully we'll get another burst of growth there. But I suppose the real concern now is that it's very tricky to get spraying done there at the moment, and spraying is backing up on farms. That them constant showers they're not very good for getting spraying carried out. So hopefully over the next few days now the weather might settle down and work might continue out in the field.
Okay, so I suppose as you mentioned yourself, there was a lot of dry weather. Crops were very stressed. Farmers, think rightly, didn't move on crops at all in terms of applying any sprays, herbicides, or fungicides. And since the weather took up and crops recovered, now I suppose crops are at a stage where they need these kind of actions. Is there a lot of those crops that have pretty much everything to do on them at the moment? Herbicides, fungicides, wild oat sprays, are they kind of all there kind of waiting for guys, or where are we at?
Yeah, it's nearly a mix of everything, depending on what stage the crop is at. Because you're right in what you were saying there. People were trying to stay off crops as much as they could because, hitting with a herbicide and then them frosty nights was never going to be ideal, But look, I'd say for the majority crops, wild oats as are stacking up there and the broadleaf herbicide. But look, just to focus, I suppose, on them crops that haven't got a spray to date, and where wild oats need to be treated in fields. Look, the best course of action there would be to go and apply the wild oat herbicide first, and then come back then at that mid to late tillering stage and apply the broadleaf herbicide along with fungicide. And look, I suppose the reason for taking this approach is that where the wild oat herbicide has been applied first, we only have to wait 7 days before we can go back in with a hormonal-based broadleaf herbicide. However, if we switch that around and go with your hormonal-based herbicide first, the interval is 21 days before we can go back in with our wild oat herbicide. So look, I think by having to wait that long, we run the risk maybe of the canopy of the spring barley kind of closing in, and we mightn't get control of them wild oats, especially if temperatures increase that bit and we get a burst of growth. And look, I suppose there might be some situations where wild oats, they mightn't be an issue, but look, for on them fields, there won't be too many. Most spring barley fields in the southeast probably will need an application of wild oat herbicide. But the best course of action here, I think, would still be to apply that herbicide along with your first fungicide at that mid to late tillering stage. And just a word of caution, I suppose, if this is the route that farmers will be taking, to that rates maybe have to increase of that herbicide because your weeds, they will be that bit stronger and control. It might be that bit harder to control these weeds when they are that bigger in the crop.
Eoin, just in terms of the farmers, might be a number of them out there who are under pressure for one reason or another. And is there a possibility that they can use the broadleaf weed spray and the wild oats all in the same tank? And in terms of the experience that you might have with that, how has it been?
Yeah, I suppose firstly you can, if you're not using the hormonal-based broadleaf herbicide, it can be mixed, but the only thing is that you'd have to use the 0.6 rate of Axial Pro if you're going with Axial. Just at the higher rate, it will need to be controlled than wild oats. And you're right, if you are under time constraints to get all your actions carried out on the crop, it could be a good course of action. Just to get the weeds controlled at the right point. But look, a word of caution, it is a lot of chemistry there in the one tank, and it could be stressful on the crop. But hopefully, the crops have come out of that stressful period, and if we do get a sort of an increase in temperature, that stress might be limited, even if you do go with that course of action.
I suppose the key thing for that really is strong growth before you apply it on, and good strong growth thereafter, and it'll shake it off pretty quick.
Yeah, look, it goes back to that 3 to 4 days before you apply go growth, and 3 to 4 days after, like we kind of always say when applying herbicides to crops.
Okay. Deirdre, can I come to you? And you're very welcome to the podcast. There's a number of varieties out there this year which are sown as spring barley, and Planet is probably one with the largest area out there. Perhaps maybe you might maybe look down through a number of the varieties with us and give us an idea if there's any weaknesses in terms of disease issues for these varieties that a farmer should be looking out for.
I suppose just to start really with the weather conditions, really, like Eoin was saying there, the temperatures and all have been quite cool over the last few weeks there. So the level of disease in general is quite low in crops there. There might be some levels of rinco or net blotch in different crops, depending on the variety you've grown. But when it comes to knowing what disease you're going to have, it is a very good idea to know the strengths and the weaknesses of the variety that you have sown. So that way you can match the resistance rating of the variety with the likelihood of a particular disease developing. So for instance, like you're saying, Planet there's quite a large area of Planet planted this year. It is quite weak for net blotch. There it has only a rating of 5 there on the department list, so it is quite weak for net blotch. So that would need to keep an eye on that there. And then the likes of gangware or erigal there, they have a good rating against net blotch, so that shouldn't really be an issue. But all varieties are likely to get a certain amount of rinco in them, particularly if we have the right weather conditions. And just when it comes to deciding the type of fungicide program you want to use on your crop, it is very important to get out there and walk that crop first, just to know what disease is actually there. So that way you can tailor what fungicide program you could use, depending on the disease variety that you're using.
Okay, and you mentioned Planet had a bit of a weakness to net blotch. Is there some resistance issues in terms of fungicides to net blotch? And maybe if there is, you might outline how bad is it, or how extensive is it, and basically how will that influence what particular fungicides a farmer is going to choose?
Yeah, sure. So we do know that there are some resistance issues out there against net blotch, particularly for the strobilurins and also an element of the SCHIs as well. It is mainly the strobilurins that have been affected, in particular azoxystrobin, so the likes of Amistar. This is due to the F129L mutation, which has caused some resistance issues there for net blotch. There is also some resistance to the SCHIs as well. Now, it's not as bad as the strobilurin resistance. However, the SCHIs they're definitely not showing the level of control that we would like to see there. But when it comes to trying to control net blotch in your crop, then I suppose like with all diseases, we would advise you use a mix of actives. This is the best strategy, not to rely on one active in particular. However, if you have a net blotch problem, like if you have Planet sown there, the best actives really to use there would be the likes of prothioconazole, so your proline, mixed with a strobilurin such as pyraclostrobin, which would be the likes of your modem or comet, or trifloxystrobin, which is found in Zephyr. So the Protio and the Strob mix there, but the pyraclostrobin or the trifloxystrobin would be the better ones to use there. Just mainly net blotch are all right, but just when if you have rinco in your crop, you can, using a potato STHI mix is your best option there. So something like, your Celtras or Alashazers, that sort of thing, because both the proline and the STHI will give good control of the grain cup.
Okay, can I just go back a second? You mentioned at the very start there that there is resistance issues with straws. Yet you're recommending that we use something like Proline plus a straw.
Mm-hmm.
How come?
It's mainly because so while we do have resistance issues to straws, the azoxystrobin, Sulcosyndiamistar, that is the one that has been mainly affected by this mutation. However, the pyraclostrobin or the trifloxystrobins haven't been affected quite as much. So these are still working quite well against net blotch, particularly when combined with the likes of prothioconazole, because that will also help to back up the straws for the control of net blotch.
Okay, that's great. Eoin, can I come back to you just for a second? Deirdre mentioned that there might be some level of disease out there at the moment. What are you seeing all the way across the southeast? And if there is any great issues, is there a necessity for farmers to act quickly?
Yeah, look, from what I've seen, I don't think there's any major issues to report at the moment in spring barley across most of the varieties now we've seen. I think many growers were thinking there with the large increase in rainfall over the past time that there might have been a good bit of pressure on spring barley, especially maybe the early sown, early March sown crops. But I think, look, them temperatures that because they've remain kind of below normal, it's slowing that progression of disease. What I am seeing maybe is a small bit of carryover micronutrient deficiencies from that dry cold time, like manganese and magnesium. But as I said, a lot of crops, it has alleviated in that past 10 to 14 days when they have got that bit of rain. Look, I suppose as regards treatment on the farms that I've been around to, I'd say the majority of that spring barley crops were sown in that mid to late March time. And they're reaching they're at that mid to late tillering stage now, and they are at the ideal time for that first fungicide to be applied to protect tillers and to try and prevent that disease coming in. And once that weather takes up, maybe next week, it's looking like that big burst of growth. So having it protected as soon as possible would be vital. Where there is that sort of lingering nutrient deficiencies, where they haven't been treated, you could treat that at that first fungicide timing as well. But look, as I said, most crops that have grown out of deficiencies, and often some growing conditions that can be as effective as anything for treating them sort of deficiencies.
Okay. Deirdre, can I bring you back in there just in terms of fungicides and when you apply the fungicides to get the best out of the fungicides in terms of either disease control or yield, and obviously they're both quite well linked. What sort of yield differences are there between a well-timed or a poorly timed fungicide?
So from the trial work that we've carried out over the last number of years, we have seen differences of up to 0.5 ton per hectare between a well-timed fungicide application and a poorly timed application. So it is very, very important to get those applications on as close to the right time as possible. I know Eoin was saying the weather isn't exactly playing ball at the moment, but trying to still as important as you can to try get the application on at the best timing. Just particularly with this first application here, at your late tiller and your growth stage 30 there, the main idea behind that is to protect your tillers and the lower canopy of the crop. This is very, very important because the grain number, so the final yield really has already been decided by the plant, because the number of grain in each tiller has already been decided. So you want to protect as many of these tillers as possible early on. So just because if they are left to get disease into them, they can die, and which can obviously lead to yield loss in the future. But I also just another point there is if disease is allowed to develop in the crop early on at this stage, you can, I suppose, increase the amount of stress that is in the crop, which could potentially increase the likelihood of ramularia in the crop later in the season. So this early this early fungicide is very important from a number of points.
Can I just clarify with you, Deirdre, just in terms of the half a ton? Is that a half a ton difference for a poorly or well-timed fungicide for the entire fungicide program, or just the first part of the fungicide program?
It's the entire fungicide program really, but it's if timings are, if they do kind of skew a little bit either way, it can be up to half a ton across the whole program.
Okay, Deirdre, finally, I just wanted to ask you a kind of a final question for the podcast today. In terms of the rates of fungicides farmers should be using, what are they?
Again, so from the work we've been using 50% rates or half rates of the actives should be perfectly sufficient there to control any disease that's in the crop there at the moment.
So are we saying 50% of the likes of your Proline plus Comet, or is it just 50% of?
So if you have we'll say a Proline Comet mix there, it would be so half rate of each, so like a 0.4 litres per hectare of Proline and 0.6 of your Comet.
Okay, Deirdre, thank you very much for that, and Eoin, thank you as well for your contribution. It's great to get a quick update on the disease control in spring barley. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
So that's it for the Tillage Edge, and my thanks to Deirdre and Eoin for joining me on the podcast. We're in the process of planning the Oak Park Open Day at the moment, which will take place on June the 29th, 30th and July the 1st. You can only attend by booking first, and details how to do this will be on the Teagasc website in the coming days. So finally, don't forget, if you like this podcast, then recommend it to a friend or colleague, and as always, rate, review and subscribe on Apple Podcast or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening, and I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.